Limerick City owes its existence to the Vikings. It was founded in 922 AD by Tormodr Helgason, known to the Irish as Tamar or Tomar MacAchle. The settlement was used as a base from which a wide catchment area was plundered. From 922 to 937, Limerick was an independent kingdom, but following defeat in a sea battle at Lough Ree in 1937, the Limerick Vikings found themselves under the rule of their victorious Dublin compatriots for the next 30 years, 937 to 967 AD. Later, Viking Limerick came under the controls of the kings of Munster from 968 to 1195. By modern standards, Viking Limerick was tiny, with a population of less than 1,000. But the Limerick Vikings also ruled over a large rural hinterland, extending into parts of County Clare and County Limerick. Its inhabitants were of mixed Irish and Viking descent, an ethnic group that became known as Ostmen, which means the men of the East. Viking Limerick was very prosperous, with trade links all over Ireland and throughout the Viking world. Many of its inhabitants were craftsmen such as leather workers, shoemakers, bone makers and comb makers, and a variety of other different craftsmen and tradesmen were engaged in working in the city. This considerable wealth is illustrated by the well-known quotation of the 12th century Irish manuscript Cogga Gael Rí Gaibh, the War of the Irish against the Foreigners, which described the sack of Limerick by the Dalcash in 967. They carried off their jewels and their best property, and their saddles beautiful and foreign, their gold and their silver, their beautiful woven cloth of all colours and of all kinds, their satins and silken cloth, pleasing and variegated, both scarlet and green, and all sorts of cloth in like manner. Viking Limerick had a relatively democratic political system, of which the most important feature was the Thing, a combined court of law and city council, which had both judicial and legislative functions. The Thing dealt with civil cases including boundary disputes, hunting and grazing rights, libel and slander, inheritance and property rights. It regulated trade and industry. It administered the laws that were concerned with religion and public morality. It passed judgment in judicial cases, but there was no police force or other enforcement machinery. Instead, the plaintiffs had to implement the judgment themselves, a system that inevitably favoured the rich and powerful. The scale of penalties inflicted by the Thing was also unjust. Acts of violence, including murder, were penalised by a sliding scale of fines or vergils, but stealing, considered to be the crime of the poor, was punished by hanging. More complicated disputes were usually settled by ordeal of battle, which was effectively a duel, or ordeals of fire, which consisted of the accused having to grasp a red-hot iron. Failure of the wound to heal within 3 days resulted in the accused being found guilty. And this was then considered to be an admission that the case was decided by superior force or by the judgment of the gods. Banishment was another and much dreaded punishment. The Thing's administrative functions cannot be distinguished from its judicial role, but seem to chiefly centre around the provision for defence and regulation of trade, functions that would have been central to the Vikings' world view. It is presumed that the Limerick Thing continued to exist throughout the centuries of O'Brien overlordship and was only brought to an end by the Norman capture of Limerick in 1195.